Welcome to the Shifted podcast and video series. Each week we connect with teachers to hear their stories about teaching and learning during a global pandemic. We focus on shifting practices, digital tools and resources, health and wellness, maintaining balance, and supporting our students during these challenging times. The Shifted podcast is from the Greater Victoria School District in beautiful British Columbia, Canada, and is recorded on the unceded territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Shifted podcast and video series. I'm John Hamlin. I work with the Greater Victoria School District, and we're broadcasting today from the unceded land of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt nation. We acknowledge the land as our part of the reconciliation process as educators, and to acknowledge the people that walked on this land before us and the significance of their role in shaping the land and how it is today. And we're really pleased to welcome Natalie Buchmann from Lambrick Park Secondary School this morning. And Natalie is a science math teacher among many other amazing talents. And we first met a couple of years ago now, when Natalie was a participant in one of our Indigenous science sessions. And back at that particular point in time, we were intrigued to explore the connection and the interplay between Western science and Indigenous science. And we were lucky enough to have several sessions out at the Songhees Wellness Center on the Songhees Nation. And they welcomed us and made us feel at home and provided us with a fantastic place to explore this pretty fascinating topic. And we had a little book that we used as our guide for the series. It was called Knowing Home, Grading Indigenous Science with Western Science. And Lorna Williams is one of the authors, local resident, UVic professor, and she came in to connect with our group and shared some of her teachings and her wisdom. We had great plans to connect with Gloria Snively as well. She collaborated with us a whole bunch, but unfortunately, when COVID hit, we weren't able to actually make that one come to life, but it was in the works, so maybe we'll get back to that again one day. But Natalie was a key voice around the table during that time, and we've kept in touch over the past couple of years, and it's been really interesting to see her kind of really take a lot of those teachings and those practices from those sessions and embody them in her practice. So Natalie, I'm really curious to hear about what's shifted for you in your science practice over the last couple of years at Lambrick.
I mean, it would be more of a question of what hasn't shifted, to be quite honest. So it's been everything from my interactions with the students and the way that I interact with the students. I've definitely gone through some shifts, not necessarily massive, some of them quite subtle. My shifts in terms of how I look at the world around me. So now when I go to the top of Pecoles, Mount Doug, I look out, and instead of seeing the community that's there, I think about what is this land? What did this land look like before we came here? You know, and to really think about less about the boundaries that the roads create and the municipal kind of division lines or boundaries create, and more about, you know, what's the topography of this space? What's present here? What are the ecosystems that are present here? And that's something that speaks to my heart already, because I really love the environment and I really love nature. And so I think coming to that session and having those 3 days to come back to again and again, which is just such a beautiful thing that we do not always have the opportunity to have as teachers. Often our Pro-D sessions are, you know, like one-off sessions. So to be able to come back and really digest, right, and really integrate was such a great thing. And I think I was ready for that, honestly, in the place that I was in my practice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we have these Pro-D times, historically, we have this one shot, let's cram as much as we possibly can into one day. And, you know, you often leave feeling, wow, that was so great, but like, where do I begin? Like it can be overwhelming and kind of overload you from a sense. And I think sometimes that actually can lead to like paralysis as opposed to action. So measuring things out, and you're right, we were incredibly fortunate and with support from our Indigenous Ed department, from Songhees Nation, to have that time and to really give it the space and the time to let those ideas germinate and develop and blossom over the course of those 3 sessions. So tell me a little bit more about some of the particular practices. I know you've been really focusing a lot on land-based education and incorporating that into your science class. So give us a little window into what that looks like for you now.
Yeah. So, it really depends on the class. I was very excited when I was at one of my science department meetings and we started talking about courses that were now available, ministry courses that were not available before. So in the secondary sciences, we have Science 9, Science 10, which are general sciences, and then we have the more specified in grade 11 and 12, right? And all students need a grade 11 science to graduate. Many students take multiple science 11s and sometimes even multiple science 12s, depending on what their interests are and what they're wanting to pursue once they're out of high school. And kind of the traditional ones that we've had around for a long time are biology, chemistry, physics, and also earth sciences in there as well. But we have some new sciences. And when I say new, they're actually not that new. Like they've actually been around for a little while now. But they're new in terms of they're still trying to find their footing in schools. So one of those courses is Environmental Science 11-12. And it literally has the exact same standing as like a biology 11 or chemistry 11 or physics 11. I find that it kind of tends to be looked at as like a special interest course, but I mean, any of those courses could be seen as a special interest course. This course is quite, there's a lot of, how do I put this? There's a lot of career paths available using this course. Yeah, and in post-secondary as well. Yeah, so what got me really excited was when I looked over the curriculum for this course, right, the curriculum document, my heart just like sang. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is the unit in Science 9, the ecology unit in Science 9 that I just love so much and wish I could spend an entire course on, because it's such a great opportunity for place-based learning within that course. So it's all about ecology, ecosystems. I mean, then we can use the ecosystems that we have here. We can use the place-based learning that we have here, and we can build relationships and maybe even work towards some of the reconciliation goals that we have, either as individuals, as a community, as a school, as a district through this course. Like, what a rich opportunity. So I advocated for it to be offered on the course selection sheet, and then you just kind of have to hope that kids are going to select for it. Mm-hmm.
And they have.
Yeah. And we're a pretty small school where, I mean, I think this course is starting to get offered more in other schools as well. I think they're offering it at Spectrum, Oak Bay, and Mount Doug. I'm not sure about Esquimalt or Reynolds. I would love to see this course offered at all of the schools and to really be seen as like a legitimate option for students. Yeah,
that's a key part too, isn't it? And you mentioned it being on equal footing with those other science courses. Even I remember myself as a high school student, I wasn't a strong math or science kid, and I remember taking earth science, and that was sort of like the A&W math, essentially. At the time, that was like the easy science that you could get to graduate. But I think it's important to really look at these options on equal footing and realize that, there's like you say, there's a ton. And in fact, probably, as a non-scientist, making this proclamation might be dangerous, but there might be more career paths taking that type of science than there is in the more discrete, fields, potentially. Would I be right? Do you think I'm right there?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think, I like to come at questions like that from a place of curiosity and kind of think about what is it in my own narrative or in the narrative of where I am that's kind of driving like the tone of that question, or like the way that question looks, because then it makes it sound like, well, what is it about chemistry or physics or even biology that make me think that those are science? And environmental science is maybe either not, or not that it's not, but like what makes that seem like not quite the same kind of science. And, you know, when I'm reading the book Braiding Sweetgrass, which was also just hugely influential for me. I'm still making my way through it actually, because I find I just like taking chunks of it and reading and just kind of letting it wash over me. But she talks a lot in that book. And I'm reminded by the talk that we had with Lorna Williams as well, of looking at First Nations perspectives, ways of learning and knowing, and the relation to Western science as well. And that we want to see that there's more than one way of knowing, right? And there's more than one way of learning. I talk about this in my science classes as well. I try to, not just with Indigenous lenses, but I try to even talk about other countries and other scientists of note. So that's something that I bring into my class. So, because the textbook, you know, pretty old textbook, and some of that just has to do with the money that we have, right? Like we have the textbook that we have, and so I don't want to be limited by that and kind of our historical white European view of science, right? Which is also like a very colonial view.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, you know, that's a great perspective, because in addition to that Indigenous perspective, you're really looking at a multitude of perspectives, realizing that based on your cultural background, you know, there's multiple different ways to look at these types of these theories. So, yeah, kudos to you for broadening your lens so huge, and yeah, really moving. I mean, this is just the vestiges of our colonial education system that are still holding on. This sort of binary black and white paradigm of what's right and what isn't, and without making room for a multitude of perspectives. So.
Yeah, and genderized as well. Like that's another aspect of things that I come across, especially in the sciences. It's really easy to have examples of kind of, you know, the male, again, white European usually, discoverers of these things. And so kind of digging a little bit, and like Rosalind Franklin, for example, looking at how we discovered the structure of DNA. So and it doesn't take long to have these conversations with the students, because, you know, I feel like I have got kids in elementary school. I feel like I'm noticing that the school system has already been shifting. You know, it's already been shifting to use inclusive language and to kind of open us up and help us see, because we need to really see by example, you know, that it's not just this one way of looking at things and that's the only way, and these other things are maybe just curiosities or interests, right? And it's like at the high school level, we need to follow suit.
Yeah.
We do. Yeah. We need to follow suit. And that's why I'm looking at sciences and going, okay, well, how can I use more inclusive language? How can I have my lessons shift so that we're with the time, right? And both in terms of gender expression, and like, so the soji kind of mantle, and then also looking at, well, where are we? Where's the school? Right? I'm at Lambrick Park, we're in Gordon Head. Well, what is this land? You know, even what watershed are we in? Where's my sense in this place? How do I help my students feel where we are, right? And connect them to this place and to each other.
That's so important, you know. And I think, you know, when I grew up, I couldn't have answered those questions if someone asked me as a kid. And you know, I think it's such an important part of our role as educators to be sharing that with our students and helping them to get a better understanding of where they are in relation to the environment and the land that they're on. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your connection with Saanich Parks and the work you've been doing there too.
I just got this the other day. It just made me so happy. So I just got this letter from Saanich saying thank you. So it just felt really, really nice. So I had a follow-up meeting with them the other day once the course ended to just kind of reflect on how everything went. Yeah, with Saanich. I mean, I've had a bit of a history in terms of my own personal desire to work on removing invasives and restore the ecosystems that we have around here. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. when I first arrived at Lambrick, maybe about 5 years ago, I was really excited to work here because of its proximity to some of its nature spaces. And I mean, a lot of our schools have great proximity, right? Like we live in just such a beautiful place.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Saanich has this organization or this kind of side division called Pulling Together. And Pulling Together has been around, I think, for maybe 15 years. So like, I thought that feels like a long time to me, but I guess that's not that long. And what it is, it's a complete volunteer, completely volunteer run, but in partnership with Saanich. So I work with Katie Turner, who is the park stewardship coordinator. So she's an employee of Saanich, right? And the park staff, they're employees, but the park stewards are volunteers. And they're vetted by Saanich, and they take on these pretty amazing roles where they basically are a steward of a local green space area. So for example, Mount Tomey has a park steward. So the park that's really close to us, within walking distance, takes us about 10 minutes to get there, is Bow and Feltham Park. And it's actually a little trail network. And so it gets used a lot by students in our area to get to and from school. It comes right out by Mackenzie, where there's a pedestrian overpass leading to Brayfoot Elementary. So it gets used by like residents. And if you look at the CRD map atlas, you can look at the historical information from 100 years ago of where Garry Oak ecosystems were. And then you can look at pictures now of where kind of dedicated Garry Oak ecosystems are. And it's a lot less than what it was 100 years ago, because Garry Oak ecosystems are places where people want to live. They're beautiful meadows, usually with beautiful views and lovely, Mediterranean-esque weather.
High property value spots.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a reason why people have love to reside in these spaces, but we are the northernmost tip of this rare ecosystem. And I tell my students, sometimes we don't think of it as rare because we live in it, right? So we think this is just common. Yeah. So and they're amazing, and they have amazing biodiversity and amazing adaptations for the climate. I mean, I can kind of just go on and on and on a tangent, but suffice to say, at Feltham Park, we have some dedicated Garry Oak spaces.
Wow.
Within walking distance from the school. Yeah. And so I've formed some relationships. Sorry, coming back to your question, working with Saanich. When I first arrived here, I just literally cold called them and was like, hey, and I think the first person I talked to didn't have the answer for me. And so I did what any teacher does. I dug around a bit, found a couple different email addresses, sent a couple emails, and just said, hey, I would love to get my students doing some invasive, basically weeding. So it's like pulling out blackberry brambles, and ivy. And it was great. They said yes. We walk there, we show up. Saanich Park's crew are there. They have all the tools, they have the gloves. They did a quick orientation with the kids. We worked for an hour, and let me tell you, you get grade 9s working for an hour. You get a lot done. And that's so satisfying, like this, it can often feel like a losing battle in these spaces with the invasives. Once you start to wake up to what invasives look like, you'll see them everywhere. Mm-hmm. And they were not here before we came here, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I really do. And I was listening to one of the bento box series from the IED.
Right.
And they were talking about ecosystem restoration as an act of reconciliation. And I hadn't thought of it that way at first, but I'm very happy to think about it that way now. And I love the idea of actually, doing something with my hands and seeing a tangible result.
Yeah.
And at the same time, being present in the environment, right? And feeling that connection. Mm-hmm.
Isn't that just the perfect mix of things? Because, we have our ways of being socially active now. And you know, you can put your background picture up and things like that. You can tweet and do things like that. But actually being able to take a physical action that, you know, requires like a significant amount of exertion and effort, but then has such an immediate and tangible beneficial result. And looking at that through the lens of reconciliation as well, that's a really good perspective to take on it. And to your point, I remember, I recently looked through a list of invasive species, and there's things in there that I had no idea were introduced, things I had always assumed, you know, but again, that's because I've seen them my whole life, right? So I just assumed, well, they must be around here, those blackberries, you know, everybody loves blackberries.
Eat them up. Eat them up. They're good to eat because you're helping if you eat them. So don't feel bad about eating them. Yeah. So there's a lot of plants like that. I will add though that after those initial years of just doing it with my grade 9 class, and I was able, whenever I taught grade 9, so I was sometimes going a few times a year for multiple years. So for me, it was really beautiful to see the space change, right? Like the first year was doing removal, the second year was doing removal, the third year we were doing plantings, right? So we'd gotten to the point with the site that we'd been working at where we were actually, and that's another great thing is Saanich provides the plants and they maintain them. So they come back and water them and help them stay alive. So we're really actually stepping into a relationship when we do this, which I also think is really important in terms of a shift in my practice is I do not want to be a consumer anymore, right? I want to model reciprocity. I want to live reciprocity. That's a really big theme of the Braiding Sweetgrass book that I've kind of picked up as well. And I feel as well, you know, in those sessions, I felt like those Pro-D sessions, I felt just the benefit of the First Nations people who were there taking the time to sit and listen to us was so beautiful and so compassionate, you know, considering everything that they've gone through. I'm getting emotional just talking about it. You know, to actually form relationship, right? And to help our kids form that relationship. We live in a fast world and it has to be an active choice, kind of like an active resistance when we can, to slow things down and say, it is worth it to take the time. It is worth it to maybe not have a set agenda, right? And to make space and to say, I want to foster a relationship where I'm not just looking for, you know, materials. Like I do that all the time. I look for materials for my classes. But to say, okay, well, maybe I'm going to take some time and try to have some reciprocity and model that with my kids. So with Saanich, once I was able to get this environmental science 11-12 course running, and the first year we did it, the pandemic hit. So didn't really get to do too much with it. I did a lot of plant scavenger hunts once we were virtual. Like, here's a picture, try and see if you can find this. Take a selfie of yourself with it. Tell me about the space that it's in. Like just, you know, like try to come up with stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah.
The park steward who works at Feltham Park, I started to have a relationship with him and he's great. He's been working with our school through other volunteer opportunities. It's not just me. There are other members of our school as well, like grade 9 service day, things like that. But we started to have more talks and I said what I wanted to do. I said, you know, I would actually like to have an experience for the kids where we actually have like a project that we work on with you, you know. And so we talked about it over the summer. I mean, this course didn't run until February of this year. We were having these conversations last summer. And then we weren't able to meet, because of the pandemic. And then in the fall, we were still talking about it. Before the course started, we went together, Katie and Alphys, the park steward, and myself went and met and picked out a site. Like we looked at a few different sites that we thought might be good. And, you know, we talked about how can we make this work so it's good for you, so it's good for me, so it's good for Saanich. Like, let's figure out where all of our kind of considerations are, right? And that's important. And that takes time, right? Like, I don't get paid for that, but it's worth it to me that then it's a good relationship, right? So yeah, and it was great.
And I think you're a great example of somebody who's worked hard to develop and curate these relationships that are supportive to your students and provide that experiential learning that is so much more meaningful than just doing whatever out of the textbook, and it's not to say that there isn't a place for both in some cases, but real kudos to you for putting that work in to foster those relationships, because those will last for years. And I'm sure, I'm sure years from now, when these kids that have gone through your program are out as adults out in the world, and they see that blackberry bush or the broom or whatever, and they go, oh, I remember that, taking that out of the Feltham Park. And
yeah,
those are the pieces that are going to stick with them for a lifetime. And
thank you. Yeah,
sure. So,
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope to shift these kids, right? And I think it's meaningful to me that they have an opportunity to take a place in our society that isn't maybe this perceived like, oh, adolescents, there they are, kind of hanging out in that group over there doing nothing. We were all adolescents at one point, hanging out in groups doing nothing. Like it's a stage, and there's nothing wrong with that. But to say, here's a place where you can do something meaningful, where you're appreciated for it. They have a great time doing it. They're so good at doing it. And they get so much done, and they get course credit for it. I get paid. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, and we're doing something good for the environment. We're doing something good for our community. And I will tell you, the places that we have worked, when I come back and go for walks in those areas, I've noticed that the neighboring residences in those areas have started cleaning up invasives that are kind of along their property line as well. So, that's not uncommon, right? When you see some beautification, or you start to see these movements that people notice that, they go, oh, you're doing that. It's way easier to step on board with something than it is to kind of start something from scratch and feel like you have this just huge, task ahead of you. So it helps activate people. That's my hope.
You've spearheaded a grassroots movement, literally and figuratively, within the community there, in terms of.
Yeah, well, and I think in some ways I've stepped into a lot of what is already happening. So this is actually a really good transition for something else I wanted to mention, which is through this, I try to make connections sometimes with other schools. There are so many schools that are doing variations of this. Maybe not necessarily as a whole course like I am. And like for Environmental Science 11, of the 4 big ideas, one of the big ideas is stewardship. So this is how we accomplish that stewardship, right? So that's why, like curriculum wise, I'm able to justify kind of us spending, 1 day a week or whatever, going and doing this work, right? This is us learning through practice. But elementary schools are doing this, middle schools are doing this. I have this vision that I would love if one day, and Saanich, when I had conversations with them, it feels like they're on the cusp of this potentially as well, maybe. So I think the timing is right. But I have this vision that one day, we can have some sort of framework where it's easy for schools to step into this. It's easy for teachers to step into this, that they don't necessarily have to send emails around, like it's hard. You got a lot of stuff going on as a teacher, right? There's a threshold.
It's been tested more than ever this year, for sure.
Yeah.
That's so fantastic. Is there any closing thoughts or additional comments or insights you'd like to share?
That's a good question. Well, I'm going to show you my picture of the thank you poster that my students made on the last day because I told them they had to. So it's laminated because I'm going to hang it, and hopefully I'll have one every year. And I sent it to Saanich. So the idea was it was for us. I can see it's probably backwards on your screen. But this was for us to say thank you to Saanich for taking the time, right? And the park steward as well, for taking the time to work with us And so this kind of pictures of us working. I just love this one here. I think it's so cute. They kind of have their arms around each other. And like, this is just a massive pile of Daphne. We're in front of this big truck, and we filled that truck to the brim with Daphne within an hour. Like, it doesn't take long for us to do this stuff. Same thing here, that whole pile, we did that in an hour. So I really loved that the kids were able to express their gratitude on here, and then in response, we got a letter of gratitude from Saanich. And to me, like, that's that reciprocity, right? So it's something that I'll cherish.
I'm going to pull out my one science word here, but it's a nice symbiotic relationship, it seems like.
Totally. Mutualism. Because we both benefit. Yeah.
Indeed.
Like bumblebees and flowers.
Yeah, these relationships are so key. And it's been interesting, every teacher I've talked to in this series, that's the dominant theme that emerges, is the relationships that, from colleagues to community, however they look in your particular practice, they enrich and make your teaching opportunities thrive and so much more. I was going to say tangible, but it's just so much more meaningful because they're real, right? These are real things. These aren't conceptual things. These aren't tests you're doing in a lab. These are real things that make a big difference in the world around us. So yeah.
These are our inherent, this is like the essence of us as human beings. We are relational creatures. For me as a parent, I've gone to kind of different talks and workshops, and as a teacher as well, and hearing about just how important relationship is. You can give somebody food and water. You don't give them relationship, they don't thrive. Yeah. So it's evolutionary. It's actually our strongest feature in terms of our adaptations as well, right? Like, that's how they can show for us as creatures. Parts of our evolution is showing, I'm going off on a weird science tangent here, but like evidence of caring for elders and things like that, like relationship. Yeah, so important for us. It definitely makes it worthwhile for me. It's what I love the most about this career. Yeah.
Well, we're so lucky to have you here, Natalie, and so grateful and appreciative for your time today. Thank you so much for the conversation. All right, folks, that is it. Season number 2 of the Shifted podcast and video series is wrapped. It's been such a pleasure connecting with all of these fantastic, talented, brilliant, thoughtful, considerate, and incredibly passionate educators from across the Greater Victoria School District. I've had so many opportunities to glimpse unique practices, different ways of doing instruction, and what an absolute pleasure it's been to have these conversations. I can't thank you enough. And I'm incredibly grateful and appreciative of the Greater Victoria School District for supporting this initiative and providing this platform to share all of your stories. That's it for Season 2. As for Season 3, well, who knows? We'll see what the future holds for Shifted. In the next few weeks, we will be dropping some bonus episodes that feature fascinating conversations with educators from outside the school district, providing unique perspectives on a year living with a global pandemic from districts all over BC. But in the meantime, thank you again for watching. Thank you for listening. We appreciate your support. Take care.
Thank you for watching or listening to the show. You can find all of our episodes, leave us a voice message, or send us any questions or comments at our website, shift-ed.ca. Until next time, take care.